Nathaniel Clay stood beneath the shimmering chandeliers in one of Manhattan's most prestigious ballrooms, his presence commanding the attention of CEOs, celebrities, and foreign dignitaries alike. He was the revered billionaire philanthropist sought after for his business acumen, his quicksilver wit, and the faint air of mystery that clung to him like an expensive cologne. Tonight, he was hosting a gala to raise funds for underprivileged youth. Smiles and flashbulbs surrounded him, swirling in a glittering spectacle of wealth and influence. Yet, behind his poised facade lurked memories he had long fought to bury. Though his tuxedo was perfectly tailored and his every mannerism that of a polished magnate, Nathaniel felt an unsettling tension pulsing beneath the surface. He caught glimpses of his reflection in the ornate mirrors lining the ballroom walls, noticing for an instant the old hungry stare in his eyes. The same stare from years back when he had to scrounge for leftover food in dimly lit diners. But that time belonged to the past, and part of him wished to keep it that way. As he glided through the room, graciously meeting donors and well-wishers, he recognized a young journalist by the buffet table. Her name was Clara Finch, a bright, tenacious reporter, notorious for her relentless pursuit of compelling stories. Despite her starstruck expression, she approached him with quiet confidence. "Mr. Clay," Clara began, offering a polite smile. "This event is extraordinary. The entire city is abuzz with talk of your generosity. But I wondered if I might talk to you about your early years. People are curious about what shaped you into the man you are." There it was, the gentle prying that so many individuals in his circle had attempted, only to be met with a politely evasive response. Nathaniel maintained a practiced warmth, though the disquiet in his chest tightened. "Of course," he said, gesturing for Clara to take a seat at a nearby table. His staff discreetly made space for them. "I've given my official backstory in interviews before. I grew up in a small town, excelled in school, and built my first company right after college." She took out her notepad and pen, her eyes alight with curiosity. "I understand. But there are rumors that you didn't always have the resources to attend private schools or secure top-tier investors so easily. There's talk your path was more." She paused, searching for the right words. "Complicated." Nathaniel's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible reflex. He studied her carefully. She was determined, yet respectful. He exhaled slowly, recalling phone calls from acquaintances who had threatened to reveal the truth if he didn't pay them. They had come from the life he'd left behind, the one he reinvented so successfully that no public trace of his origins seemed to remain. It all dated back to the dusty outskirts of a dying industrial town, a place locals dubbed Breakwater Edge. Born in a cramped trailer, Nathaniel had fought for every scrap of dignity. Friends and family around him accepted their fate as mill workers or waitresses in a diner that never saw new customers. But Nathaniel wanted to escape, so he embraced books, equations, and a relentless thirst for knowledge. Nights turned to early mornings as he studied business models by the flickering street lamp outside his rusted door. He saved money from odd jobs, flipping burger patties and unclogging grease traps for meager pay, every cent fueling a future he could only dare to imagine. It's that S when the real pivot came. A small-time technology. Entrepreneurs spotted him poring over a borrowed computer in the library after hours. Impressed by Nathaniel's ability to break down code and market potential, he offered him a modest internship in the city. The environment was cutthroat, and the entrepreneur had questionable ethics. But it gave Nathaniel a front-row seat to how technology startups soared and how they crumbled. Aware that Clara was waiting for his response, he forced a controlled smile. "Every journey has its share of complexities," he answered vaguely. "But a better question might be how we use our experiences for good. Tonight's event, for instance, is about empowering children who face the same struggles I once did." Clara nodded, catching the implication, but not pressing just yet. "Thank you, Mr. Clay. Quite inspiring indeed. I hope you won't mind if I reach out with a few more questions." He gave her a courteous nod before drifting back into the crowd. Yet her inquiry had stirred old anxieties, and it wasn't just the fear of public scrutiny. There was a specific event he never spoke, a van incident that kept him awake on nights when the ghostly hush of his penthouse felt too suffocating. He'd broken the law, albeit out of desperation, during those bleak teenage years. He still remembered the acrid smell of gasoline in the air, the dull glow of a single overhead bulb as he stood face to face with a life-altering choice. His secrets had allowed him to break free from his impoverished beginnings, but they were also the darkest stain on his conscience. Now, with a bright reporter digging into his past, he feared that the shimmering image of Nathaniel Billionaire's savior, philanthropist, could unravel. Later that evening, after the last guests departed and the cleaning crew discreetly began stacking chairs, Nathaniel stood alone near an ice sculpture centerpiece. The clang of silverware and the hush of vacuum cleaners made for an oddly comforting background noise. He knew that if Clara Finch found the truth, she would publish a piece far more shocking than any conventional rags-to-riches story. The memory gnawed at him, a small-town scandal that had nearly destroyed him before he'd ever stepped foot in a boardroom. As he left the ballroom, stepping into the crisp night air, New York's skyline stretched around him, monolithic towers of glass and steel, symbols of ambition and triumph. He had garnered all the accolades that society could offer, the 8-figure bank accounts, philanthropic accolades, and the hush-hush invitations to exclusive gatherings. Yet, with a single article, the legacy he'd built might be tarnished. He headed toward his limousine, the driver holding the door with a silent nod of respect. Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, looking back at the opulent venue. The polished floors and glittering chandeliers seemed to watch him, echoing the question he couldn't quite silence. How long can a man run from the very past that made him? The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows in Nathaniel Clay's penthouse, illuminating the meticulously curated artworks and designer furniture. He sipped dark roast coffee at his mahogany desk, scanning headlines about the gala's success on a gleaming tablet. Prominent magazines praised his philanthropy, and social media was abuzz with praise for the man who never forgot his humble beginnings. If only they knew exactly how humble. A chime from the security panel interrupted his thoughts, alerting him that a visitor had arrived downstairs. Moments later, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, Clara Finch is here. She doesn't have a scheduled appointment, but she insists it's urgent." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Curiosity and anxiety warred in his mind. He weighed his options. Send her away until he was ready, or let her in and face whatever revelations she might already have. If he stonewalled too long, suspicion would grow. "Show her in," he said calmly. "I'll see her in the sitting room." When Clara entered, she was dressed more casually than at the gala, wearing a smart blazer over jeans, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Immediately, he sensed an unspoken tension. She looked resolute, like someone who had found a key that unlocked a hidden vault. He politely offered her a seat on a streamlined sofa. "I appreciate you seeing me on short notice," she began, placing her notepad on the coffee table. "I've been talking to a few people from Breakwater Edge." Nathaniel's chest tightened. That single mention of his hometown was like a meat hook snagging his heart. He forced a neutral expression. "Oh, I'm guessing you learned it's far from the success story the city is used to hearing about." She cleared her throat, choosing her words carefully. "They told me about your family, the trailer park, the rumors. I also spoke to a retired officer's clerk who mentioned a warehouse fire connected to an insurance payout. It was never proven who started it, but there's a suspicious thread linking you to an incident right before you moved out." Nathaniel inhaled, shutting his eyes momentarily. The memory came roaring back in all its bleakness. The gutted shell of a warehouse, desperate gamble to collect insurance money for an ailing relative. His mother had been on the brink of losing her life without an expensive medical treatment. He'd been a teenager, out of options, terrified of seeing her die. The ambiguous circumstances around the fire had paved the way for a settlement that funded her hospital bills and a ticket out of Breakwater Edge for him. Even decades later, the moral burden was crushing. "You want to know if I did it right?" he asked quietly. "You want the full story so you can expose me?" Clara hesitated, empathy flickering in her gaze. "I want the truth, Mr. Clay. I spent hours reading about your charitable work, about the championing of education and health care. People see you as a savior for the underprivileged. But if this is part of your story, they deserve to know everything, not just the sanitized version." He paused, clasping his hands tightly. For a split second, he was back in that scorching warehouse, the smell of smoke searing his nostrils, the fear rippling through his bones. "My mother was dying," he finally confessed. "She needed an operation we couldn't afford. I had no father, and there was no insurance for my family. Desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. I did start that fire. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth. Clara listened without judgment etched on her face. She scribbled a short note, but her gaze remained soft. Your mother survived, didn't she? I found her obituary. It said she passed away only recently, and in a hospice that you personally funded. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes drifting to a framed photo on a nearby shelf. A warm snapshot of his mother wearing a smile wrinkled by time, yet radiant with pride. I made sure she had the best care. That's how I repaid her for, well, everything. Silence prevailed for a long moment. Then he looked Clara in the eye, the steel returning to his voice. I'm not going to justify what I did as right. It was criminal, and I spent years looking over my shoulder. The guilt never left. But that is the reason I started my philanthropic ventures, to save other teenagers from facing that kind of terrible choice. She sat back, pen in hand, her reporter's instincts urging her to probe deeper. Are you ready for the consequence of this truth coming out? He inhaled, searching for the composure he'd perfected in boardrooms full of cynics. I had my attorneys quietly handle certain details. Legally, the investigation had long gone cold. But morally, I am prepared to face the blowback, if that's what happens. People might tear down the image of me they've built up. I have to accept that. Clara nodded, clearly conflicted. Before I write anything, I'll give you a chance to comment formally. Please know this isn't just about a sensational headline. It's about a man who changed countless lives, but also carries a dark burden. That's a complicated story, and it speaks to our flawed humanity. Maybe the public needs that kind of truth more than I realized. Nathaniel offered a small, genuine smile full of resignation and relief. He thanked her, walking her to the private elevator. As she stepped inside, their eyes met in, understanding passing between them. She held the power to either destroy his carefully crafted reputation or present a nuanced portrait that let the broader world see beyond mere riches and gilded perfection. When the elevator doors closed, the tension drained from Nathaniel's shoulders. He wandered back to his desk, gazing at the cityscape through sheer glass panes. Regret was a bitter taste he could never fully wash away, but for the first time in years, he felt something akin to release. If the truth came to light, it could cost him alliances, endorsements, and possibly his philanthropic influence. Yet, he also recognized that real healing might only begin the moment he stood honest and bare before the world. In a way, revealing his secret could allow him and his mother's memory to finally rest. And if that meant losing his spotless public image, well, perhaps the real measure of a man was not in how he amassed his fortune, but in how honestly he reckoned with the ghosts that accompanied it all the way to the penthouse suite.